Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. This is the third webinar of the Essentials of Literacy Local Leaders. We've already been presented information by our masterful master trainers about the gradual release of responsibility in webinar 1, and then the workshop model in webinar 2. It's been great to see the engagement continue with lots of webinar assignments being submitted. So I can't wait to see what discussion posts are to follow from tonight's webinar. Now, remembering my quote back from webinar 1, Fullen and Gallagher believe that 80% of the best ideas come from leading practitioners. So we've assembled another group of master trainers to share their literacy expertise with you this afternoon. I'm absolutely in awe of Basto's master trainers, but I'm especially enthralled with those who have presented and are still preparing to present this series of webinars to you all. Not only on top of a full teaching load, as well as school leadership responsibilities and their day-to-day work, these individuals have been willing to share their knowledge and expertise, so I sincerely can't thank them enough for their time and commitment to this project. Now, just some housekeeping reminders before we begin. To those of you who have successfully joined us for the live streaming again tonight, welcome back. You're old hats by now, but hopefully you're viewing today's webinar through the webinar 3 page in Basto 307. Here you'll have immediate access to the YouTube live stream, as well as the Padlet Backchannel, your third webinar assignment, as well as some very important survey links that I'll explain to you later on in the webinar. The Padlet is a great opportunity for you to respond in real time with your experiences and questions about the webinar content. Now, while some of you are posting in this forum with some anonymity, Basto still expects everyone to adhere to the code of conduct you agreed to when registering for the course. So please ensure your Padlet posts continue to be positive and respectful this afternoon. While we always encourage you to watch the webinars live with us at home, we understand that things come up. So please note that, as with our other webinars, today's will be recorded and uploaded to Basto 307 in the coming days, so you can catch up on anything you've missed. To any of you still experiencing technical difficulties, make sure you send through an email to the digital team at digital.learning@basto.vic.edu.au. I'm really excited about the content of this afternoon's webinar, as lots of people in the Introduce Yourself discussion post spoke about their aspirations for this course, including the ways that they can engage students in literacy learning. Hopefully this webinar focused on student agency and authentic literacy will provide you with some great strategies to consider. Over to you, Steph.
Hi everyone. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we are all gathered today. I recognise and honour their ongoing connection to land, water and culture. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to any First Nations people who may be with us today. As we welcome you to the third webinar of our Essentials of Literacy Local Leaders, please head to the Padlet and let us know where you are watching from. As we've said, my name is Steph Galvin. I am a Learning Specialist and Literacy Coordinator at Heidelberg Primary School. And today it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to 3 incredible fellow master trainers who all have a wealth of knowledge and, most importantly, a real passion for our content topic tonight. First up, we have Stephanie Coble, who is a DSSI teaching partner from the NEV region. We have Deborah Mathers, Assistant Principal from Lakes Entrance Primary School, and Louise McInnes, a Learning Specialist and Literacy Coordinator from Macclesfield Primary School. You may notice that we have included covers of books next to our names. We have borrowed this from Narissa Lung, who some of you may know as Auslit teacher, who likes to introduce herself by way of books, and we thought that was an excellent way to introduce ourselves this evening. We, like you and your students, have a wide variety of bookish tastes, and we celebrate a love of reading. And if you're anything like me, you might always be on the lookout for some good book recommendations. If you're still introducing yourselves in the Padlet, you might feel free to share a book that you've been enjoying recently as well. Today's webinar marks the halfway point of this course. It's really important that in between the webinars, everyone is taking the opportunity to share their learning, whether it's conversations you've had or ideas from the webinar that you've trialled back in your schools or your different contexts. We really encourage you to connect with your virtual community of practice through the Basto 307 learning space. It is a really great opportunity for you to share all of those ideas and discussions on the discussion boards and to continue the conversations that begin in tonight's webinar and in all subsequent ones as well. Every good lesson begins with a learning intention, and tonight we are going to explore what authentic literacy experiences are made up of across all three English modes. So that includes reading, writing, speaking and listening. And we also want to look at how the development of student agency can enhance this authenticity. If we are successful this afternoon, we hope that you leave this webinar feeling like you can identify how you can engage your students in authentic literacy experiences, and that you can reflect on how you can incorporate student agency to enhance your literacy tasks in the future. This afternoon, we have a lot of content to cover. Louise is going to begin by exploring what authentic audience and purpose is. And then that's going to be followed up by Steph, who is going to be talking about authentic literature. When we return from during the break, Laura is going to talk a little bit about the different offerings Basto has and also how you can access the discussion boards. And when we return from the break, Deb and I are going to be unpacking what student agency looks like in the literacy classroom through the lens of independent reading and the readers and writers notebooks. As we conclude this afternoon's session, we'll share a range of resources that will hopefully further deepen your understanding, and we'll leave you with a call to action as well. I hope you're excited as I am about the content for this afternoon's session. I'm now going to pass it over to Louise to start us off.
Thank you so very much, Steph, and hello everybody, and welcome to the first part of our presentation on authentic literacy. I'd like to remind all of our participants to contribute your questions or comments to our Padlet back channels throughout the presentation, as Steph and Laura have just mentioned. During this first part of the presentation, we'd like to know, what does authentic literacy mean to you? Today we're going to work on understanding what we mean by authentic literacy experiences, because research indicates that this is where humans learn literacy most efficiently. As an essential underpinning of our coursework, we're going to explore this key understanding of how humans become literate. Research says that learning is most effective when it takes place in real functional contexts. Literacy learning is most effective when learners are engaged in real literacy experiences. This is particularly relevant in the production of language, so that is speaking and writing. The particular context will make a big difference to the learning, so a context that suits what the language is for. The context for the learner will have a true communicative purpose. Authentic literacy activities have a writer and a reader, a speaker and a listener. This is important for learners in both primary and secondary settings. As an example of a functional context, think about the acquisition of language. 6 key elements of this authentic literacy experience are present. Babies are immersed in language. The language is correctly modelled with a significant repetition in the expectation that there will be a response and eventually a correct outcome. The baby makes approximations and receives timely, accurate and supportive feedback. Along with feedback, any accuracy is celebrated by significant others. While engaging in this authentic context, the child's able to increase their accuracy and build the diversity of their knowledge. This experience shapes the beginning of their lifelong acquisition of language. As with other examples given in webinar 1, I'm sure you're going to be able to relate this model of learning to the classroom context. Key to the development of authentic literacy experiences are the elements of authentic purpose and audience. In this first session today, we'll be looking at how these 2 crucial ingredients, along with text choice, go hand in hand to promote a true communicative purpose and the best literacy outcome for our students. And another reminder to please post in the chat space. I believe we've already had some comments come through about what authentic literacy means to you, so that's fantastic. We'd also love to hear some of your teachable moments through authentic literacy experiences. We'd love to see what they are when you share them. Authentic literacy is going to be centred on real life connections for the students. For this to occur in a classroom setting, teachers need to establish authentic contexts and purposes. Today we're going to delve into how best this can be achieved for our students. Students need to be able to pursue their interests and develop their own questions to make authentic inquiries. Importantly, literacy experiences will not be contained just to the subject of English, because we acknowledge the importance of researching through reading and listening and communicating through writing and speaking in all subject areas. This becomes increasingly important as students move through secondary schooling. Ongoing talk is going to exist between students and teachers and their peers, where students have the opportunity to engage in dialogue, to clarify and extend their understanding in varied ways, and practice using language in new ways to construct their knowledge. As we heard in webinar 2, in relation to the workshop model, students need to talk about what they read and write, and peer discussion is vital for student engagement. This will enhance their critical thinking and improve their metacognitive skills. Dialogic classrooms are discussed more comprehensively in the extended Literacy Local Leaders course. As part of an authentic literacy setting, we're going to link authentic contexts and purposes with literature to demonstrate examples of relevant, high-quality literature, various genre, research, so the children can research information, extend their thinking to inspire creative ideas, and we mustn't forget to foster a love of reading. The literature that we expose the students to will ideally be that which belongs in the real world. We can rate the authenticity of a text by evaluating it for its true communicative purpose, and Steph's going to be looking at this in detail later. Similarly, we can rate the authenticity of a literacy activity according to the purpose that the students read, write, listen or speak. Again, is it for a true communicative purpose? Importantly, in an authentic literacy setting, students will learn new words through rich conversations with adults and peers, wide reading and activities involving wordplay. As Emma mentioned in webinar 2, vocabulary study may be included during the opening of the Readers' Workshop. Within a relevant context linked to inquiry, transdisciplinary themes and rich authentic literature, students are going to interact with words to associate them with other words, images and definitions as needed. You can find this example of exploring word meaning while studying poetry in the Years 7 to 10 Literacy Teaching Toolkit. To establish authentic contexts and purposes for reading and writing, speaking and listening, teachers are going to need to seek the information that the students want to know. Within the framework of our Victorian curriculum and the constructs of the planning documents within our own school setting, teachers will need to generate ways to find out students' prior knowledge, questions and specific interests. Here are some examples of how we can do that. Familiar to all teachers, the use of excursions or incursions and practical experiences such as experiments and demonstrations all provide perfect tuning in environments for student questions to be generated and inquiries to begin. Students can then authentically report back, write and read to investigate further. The relationship between speaking and listening, reading and writing using first-hand experiences is crucial to EALD students in both primary and secondary settings. Please refer again to the Literacy Teaching Toolkit for more details about using a language experience approach. Very importantly, teachers need to recognise when valuable, unexpected moments occur and make the most of literacy activities that could develop from these. This photo shows some passionate writing that evolved from a prep student of mine following a peer disclosure that the tooth fairy does not exist, as he'd been told by his parents. Vigorous debate ensued and we researched literature about fairies and viewed a documentary questioning evidence of fairy existence. We'd been practising writing expository text within the context of our unit of inquiry, and we'd spent a great deal of time practising how to share our opinion verbally. For this child, choosing to communicate her strong opinion through writing demonstrated its importance. This is an example of a child choosing their own topic, and making decisions during open cycle writing in the Writers' Workshop. It also represents the independent stage of the gradual release of responsibility. We encourage you to look back over the work samples that we've chosen for our presentation once it's published to really zoom in and have a look at the details. One of the many graphic organisers available, KWHL charts are an extremely useful tool during a topic introduction. They're an effective way to gather understandings and questions, but really importantly, they're also a way of identifying misconceptions from the "What do I know" section, which can act as an invitation to take the learning further in this direction with teacher provocations. During the first period of remote learning, a misconception became evident from one of my students that plants are dead once they're pulled out of the ground within our unit of inquiry exploring the needs of living things. There was a mixture of opinion about this, and as a result, students investigated this hypothesis. They conducted an experiment, formed conclusions, and reported their findings to others in the remote community by writing them down. During the unit of inquiry, they'd been immersed in a variety of relevant literature. Don't forget that questions can and should be gathered throughout a unit of study as the student understandings develop and change. Discordant events may be naturally occurring or set up by the teacher as part of tuning into an inquiry. It'll be an event that will inspire a student's sense of curiosity or wonder and evoke questioning. This photo shows an apparently lost suitcase found at school, which the children hypothesised about as an introduction to an inquiry to explore various types of journeys and how they may lead to change. Problem solving can be a powerful motivator for reading and writing. Following our first lockdown period, my students addressed one child's question from our unit of inquiry about why plastic is so bad. They heard and read information to find out more. They collected rubbish in the playground and sorted this to gather data. Following their findings, they wanted to go further by collecting more. They drew conclusions with verbal responses and decided that they wanted to take action to solve the problem that they'd discovered. Together, we constructed a shared writing piece, which they wanted to publish in the school newsletter. Born out of a desire for our whole school community to be informed, the writing had a true communicative purpose. You can find out more about shared writing on the Literacy Teaching Toolkit. As in the previous example, and as Tracy mentioned while describing the Writers' Workshop in Webinar 2, audience is integral to authentic literacy experiences. Expressive language requires an audience. Outside of the school context, in real-life writing scenarios, people almost always write only if there's a reader for their writing, even if it's themselves, as is in the case of a personal journal or note, where the reader is also the writer. A real reader is one who reads the writing for its communicative purpose, not only for the purpose of evaluating it, which really happens a lot of the time in schools. This is another example of writing during remote learning. It was decided before the children recorded their findings that the audience would be our school community, which is a really powerful motivator. As in the previous example, teachers and students need to establish real audiences for their writing. The audience will be linked to the purpose of the text, for instance, to inform, instruct, or entertain. Establishing an audience becomes a motivational tool and rationale for finishing and possibly publishing writing pieces. This is an example of how audience and purpose are integrated into the gathering of student ideas in a class writer's notebook. When modelling writing in this way, I ask students for the purpose and audience before we begin. That is, why would we write? Why would we write this? And who might read it? The elements that we've just discussed as listed here are integral for ensuring that literacy experiences are of most value to our students. Steph's now going to explore with you literature and mentor texts as another dimension of authentic literacy experiences. Thanks, Steph.
Thank you so much, Louise. Your classroom sounds like a magical place to be, and your students are producing such incredible writing, even in the remote learning context, which is hugely beneficial. I can't imagine how much authentic audience and purpose you've given them during even our remote learning context. Yay for Louise. I have absolutely loved following along in the Padlet wall with everybody's contributions around authentic literacy, and a lot of really great contributions there about authentic literacy having a real life purpose, being meaningful and relevant for the learner. Somebody mentioned that authentic literacy to me means reading and writing activities or lessons that are based in the real world and are relevant to our students. And lots of talk about how when our reading and writing is authentic, our students are more engaged, they're engaged themselves, the teacher doesn't have to necessarily direct them as much or refocus them as much. They're interested and they want to read and write. They have their own ideas and they want to share them. It's absolutely wonderful to see all the authentic literacy experiences that people are already sharing with their students in their classrooms, both on-site and remotely. What a great time to be facilitating authenticity in the classroom. Thank you so much for those contributions, guys. Please keep them coming. I'm also loving reading all the different books that people are reading at the moment. As mentioned at the start by the other Steph, we are all big readers and we absolutely love getting all of your contributions and suggestions for great texts to read both ourselves as readers and with our students. That leads me to my passion, that being authentic literature. At the heart of all authentic literacy teaching and learning lies high quality, authentic literature and mentor texts. And when we think about authentic literature, what that really means is to be authentic, a text, whether it be written or read, must be like texts that are used by readers and writers outside of a learning to read or write classroom. These are the texts that occur naturally in the lives of people outside the classroom, or those that we can find in instructional contexts that very closely mimic real-world texts. And I'm thinking about those texts that we can find in the newsagents, when I'm thinking about good old newspapers, when I go to the bookstore, when I'm looking at Netflix on student documentaries, and all those wonderful online resources that mimic what I do as a real-world reader. I also encourage you to have a look at the Duke reading at the end of this, as she talks a lot about rating the authenticity of the text you are using in your classrooms. And she includes in that reading a lovely scale and a bit of a rubric in terms of how you can think about your text that you're using in the classroom. When we look to the Victorian curriculum, texts are the basis for our instruction and study across all three modes, reading and viewing, writing and speaking and listening. Text should be written, spoken or multimodal and in print and digital forms. And many of the authentic literacy tasks that students undertake will involve reading, comprehending and discussing those texts. And then on the flip side, they'll also be producing or writing imaginative, informative, persuasive texts, also media texts, everyday texts, and hopefully, eventually, workplace texts. When we think about the reading and writing of various texts, we really encourage our teachers to think broadly about the specific genres you use for study with your children, specifically in relation to text type and purpose, so that students are reading, comprehending and writing the many different genres that occur in the daily lives of literate people. Basically, as Louise mentioned before, there has to be a really clear purpose and authenticity for our reading and writing. In the context of the secondary space, this purpose might be to read like a historian in a humanities classroom or write like a scientist in the science classroom. Or if we're thinking of our English classrooms, we might be thinking about teaching our students how to appreciate, comprehend and analyse literature. As a primary teacher myself, we are very blessed to create the conditions in which our students have authentic reasons to read and write in a specific genre, as Louise talked previously about. This lovely resource here is available now on our BASTO 307 platform for you to consider when planning your units of work in the classroom. We encourage you to think strongly about the purpose for reading and the purpose for writing. In the Victorian curriculum, it talks about the 4 different elements of reading and writing, that being imaginative, poetry, informative and persuasive. We do know that poetry is an imaginative text. However, in the Victorian curriculum, it does separate out the two. And we encourage you to think when designing your units, how the purpose for reading and writing in these particular modes influences the text type and the genre that you are choosing to read and write with your students. I think one of the things we don't want to fall into the trap of is the good old introduction, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, and conclusion, because we know persuasive writing is so much bigger than that. So we really want to be exposing our students to as many different genres, obviously developmentally appropriate, in accordance to what their purpose is for writing. When we think about the reading, that really opens up such a broad range of text for us to look to. And I think in terms of informative, it blew my mind when I thought about not just the traditional non-fiction text, you know, that we get about bugs or horses or whatever animal you might be interested in, but also those hybrid texts where authors are choosing to read or to write both in an informative stance, but also fictional. Also science reports as we move into high schools, biography, documentaries, historical reports, etc. So really broadening the types of genres and text types that we're exposing our kids to. And just to reiterate, that's now available on our BASTO 307 platform for you to use and refer to as much as you'd like. When we think about the reading of authentic texts, I'm going to put aside writing for a moment because reading really opens up some elements here that I'd love to touch on. They provide important opportunities for learning about the aspects of the human experience and about aesthetic value. We need to ensure that the texts that we explore and provide our students with, either in the form of whole class or independent reading texts, serve as mirrors, that being those that serve to reflect our own students' identities, experiences, and motivators, but also those that serve as windows and sliding glass doors. Those texts that provide insight into the identities, experiences, and motivation of others, and perhaps even change our perspectives about the possibilities in the real world, other than our own perspectives. When we look to the Victorian curriculum, texts can be drawn from the world and Australian literature. They should include the oral narrative traditions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, texts from Asia, texts from Australia's immigrant cultures, and texts of the student choice. So lots of different experiences for our students to engage in when they're reading authentic literature. Now, one of the questions that we always come across in schools and in our work is, but where do we find these mentor texts? Where do we find such a broad range of texts to engage our students in? And I think that we're very blessed tonight because we have a very engaging and active Padlet wall happening in the background. And we'd love for you guys to become our experts tonight and potentially list 2 awesome mentor texts or authors on our Padlet wall across all subject areas, all curriculum areas, primary, secondary, that support our readers and writers. You might want to label that as such, but I know that I am constantly on the lookout for new mentor texts to add to my library, despite my husband getting pretty upset with the budget blowing out on me purchasing new texts every week or so. So I encourage you to head to our Padlet wall now and start talking more books. That's our journey tonight. I'll definitely be collating them later for my own purposes. I'd like to talk now a little bit about when we've defined our real life connections, as Louise mentioned before, and our authentic audience and purpose, we can bring a wide range of text types and genres to a unit that support all of our students' learning across all disciplines. These authentic texts serve as mentor texts for our students, both as readers and writers. And I think about the concept of a mentor, that being something that we can look up to and aspire to. So when I think of mentor texts, I'm really thinking of them as being a platform on which to base my knowledge as a reader and a writer. So we can use these mentor texts for a wide variety of learning, including building content knowledge. So when we think about this, we can think about using texts in our classes as opportunities to learn about history, geography, politics, economics, civics and citizenship, all of those elements of the Victorian curriculum that texts can really help to support. Let's take, for example, This Young Dark Emu, a fairly new book. I think it came out last year, 2019, by Bruce Pascoe. It's a non-fiction picture book, which is great for upper primary and secondary. I know that sounds a little odd thinking of picture books in the secondary context, but it is an incredible text used to learn about the Indigenous experiences through the colonisation of Australia. I encourage you to have a look at that one if you haven't already. Another thing that we can use our mentor text for is modelling how a proficient reader decodes, comprehends and interacts with a text. We are very blessed to be the proficient reader in our classrooms, and we must provide the students with the I do part of the gradual release of responsibility. We need to ensure that we're giving students the opportunity to witness a more knowledgeable other utilise the strategies being demonstrated and invite them into the mind of that knowledgeable other, something that Fisher and Frey, who brought together the theories of the gradual release of responsibility, are really passionate about. And this can be done both in primary and secondary contexts, as the complexities of text that we're engaging in really amplifies and increases. Furthermore, we can use our mentor text to amplify a particular reading comprehension strategy or strategies, whether that be the Fontes and Pinnell strategies of strategic thinking, cafe strategies, or other. But I really encourage you, especially those in middle primary to secondary, to give this a broader purpose beyond that of just we are learning to infer. We want to think about why are we learning to infer? Why is this an important skill in our learning journey or in this particular moment in our class novel or shared text? Are you inferring because this text has complex characters that you're seeking to understand, or are you inferring because a setting may impact the development of a story? Proficient readers don't approach a text just with a predicting hat on or just with an inferring hat on. So we must provide context and authentic purposes for our reading comprehension strategies. It doesn't mean that we can't amplify or draw attention to a comprehension strategy. We just want to make sure that there's some real authentic engagement and purpose behind that. We can also use our mentor texts. Gosh, these mentor texts have a lot of purposes. That's why we need a huge bank of them, because we love them so much. So we can use our authentic mentor texts to read like a writer and learn from real authors. We can use them to analyse the 6+1 traits of writing, and you can see that we've done something similar using Charlie Higson's The Enemy, a great text for secondary students. Unfortunately, we don't deep dive into the traits of good writing within this sequence of webinars, but the extended Literacy Local Leaders course explores this in greater detail if this is a journey that your school is on. We can also use our authentic mentor text to pull out and analyse authentic vocabulary and spelling. Take, for example, this Nick Bland book on the right here. Look at all those incredible tier 2 words that we can explore the morphology, phonology and etymology of. What a great investigation for the students in our classroom as we're learning to decode and pull apart vocabulary. This is also, as Louise mentioned at the beginning of the webinar tonight, this is also something that can be replicated in secondary classrooms when we really look to those content words and the tier 3 words within text. And finally, and probably not in totality, I'm sure there's lots of other reasons we can use our mentor texts, but finally we can use our texts as a platform for dialogic classrooms. I'm incredibly passionate about texts. I could talk about them all day long. And I think about my experiences as a proficient reader and how when I finish reading a text all I want to do is go and discuss it with somebody else that has read the same book as me. And we need to do the same for our students. To foster a love of books, children really need opportunities to talk about them. Book clubs, book talks, partner reading, just engaging in informal dialogue around our texts that we're reading in. And we encourage you to look to the Literacy Teaching Toolkit that Laura posted on the Padlet wall before if you'd like more information about some of the ways in which we can engage in dialogue around our texts. That brings me to nearly the close of my very passionate rant about authentic mentor texts and authentic texts in the context of our classrooms. I can see I've got the Padlet flying beside me with all of these incredible texts and books happening on the Padlet wall. And so I'd love to offer you some of my favourite places to go hunting for mentor texts. I know that I find it hard when I'm hunting and planning and thinking about what to teach my students, where I can go for some ideas. So I wanted to offer you some of my favourite places to go hunting for texts. So I know it looks a lot, and I promise that we've got our lovely facilitators posting all of these links in the chat today, and they'll be available on our Basto 307 platform later. But up the top left there, we have the Auslit teacher. Her name's Narissa Liang. She works closely with Basto. She posts a whole range of mentor texts, both on Instagram and Facebook, but also on her website. And she links them to the comprehension strategies and 6+1 writing traits, identifying what area of the primary to secondary the text would be best for. Up the top there is Languages and Multicultural Education Resource Centre, fondly known as LMERC. This is a specialised library for teachers in the areas of EAL, languages, and the Victorian curriculum cross-curriculum priority areas. So thinking about the different perspectives using text as mirrors and windows. So the LMERC Centre can coordinate and arrange deliveries of resources, books, artworks, etc., free of charge for any state school, and we encourage you to use them. They're not open at the moment due to coronavirus, but hopefully they'll be reopened soon. I'm going to move down to the Children's Book Council of Australia with the small child reading a book there. This is the CBCA. You've probably heard of this in your classroom, but they release a short list of award-winning Australian texts every year, and they also list award winners from years previous. This is the first place I go hunting for text, because usually the more stickers a book has on the front of it, the better it is. We know that they're not just award winners because somebody is friends with the, the judge. So we encourage you to go have a look at the CBCA. That ranges all the way from young readers all the way to young adults. So a broad range there. Moving to the left, the Copyright Agency Reading Australia. This website's just come to my attention recently. Do a very similar job to what Auslit Teacher does. They list a whole range of primary texts and secondary texts, and they talk about the year level that would be appropriate for and the text itself. So a little bit of information about those texts. A fantastic website, very easy to use and very easy to navigate. I'm going to shift right across the screen there to the National Centre for Australian Children's Literature. This is the NCACL, and it has a comprehensive collection of material about Australian children's literature. The collection has books, artwork, biographies about the authors, etc. Finally, I am going to introduce you to Penny Kittle's website to the left there. Penny Kittle is the author of 180 Days, an excellent resource and text for high school secondary teachers, a fantastic educator that comes out of the United States. Penny Kittle has a huge range of mentor texts designed for secondary students on his website, most of which are short, sharp written pieces, some written by students themselves, which is an excellent resource to show our students in our own classroom, some of those fantastic mentors coming from students. And finally, those three down the bottom there, Mile High Reading, Mr. Sharp and Pernell Rip, they are all American bloggers, and they post reviews of both mentor texts that are already out and about, and also those that are coming out in 2021. They are all three of them American bloggers, and so therefore a lot of the content is American literature, but it is fantastic and a really easy place to go hunting for really great literature for your classroom. Okay, I hope you're feeling the passion from me in terms of mentor texts and texts in general. I could talk about books all day. I don't have that time, which is really unfortunate, and I'm itching to head to the Padlet wall and have a look at what everybody's been posting about in terms of texts. But in the meantime, I am going to hand over to our lovely Laura, who's going to lead us into the break today. Thanks, Laura.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Steph. And you're absolutely right. The Padlet wall is going off at the moment in terms of people posting some really great resources in terms of where you can go for amazing literature, especially some of the Australian offerings that are out there, which is really great to see, as well as a huge number of authors that you can potentially be looking at. Anthony Brown, Sean Tan, Ando, and Margaret Wilde getting a real shout out there. And we know there's some real classics amongst them. So we've changed the structure of today's webinar, and obviously this is the 10 minutes for you guys to set aside to potentially complete your webinar assignment. You may very well have already kind of gone off on a tangent and looking through some of those wonderful resources that Deb has posted into the Padlet as well. But we would like to draw your attention back to some of the features on Basto 307 that I'm about to go through and show you. But as we do move along, remember your webinar assignment does need to be submitted. There's been a huge number of responses over the last couple of days to webinar 2, but your webinar 3 assignment over the next couple of weeks is posing this question to you. So what changes could you make to your teaching practice or lead in your school to ensure authentic literacy experience or to increase student agency in literacy? So there's some really great provocations there for you guys to be thinking about, potentially some blue sky thinking, and do make sure you're staying tuned for the second half of the webinar today, because there's some really great information about some ways and some strategies you can actually start to leverage that with. But while we are here, I am going to share my screen and I'm going to take you back through Basto 307 to actually share some things that you can start to do there. It's been really fabulous to obviously see everyone responding to the Padlet and to actually be commenting on some of the books that you guys love using in your classroom. But I think a really great suggestion, because there's obviously so much happening on that Padlet, would be to post some of those in the discussion board on Basto 307. We've obviously got here the webinar 307 page here, which is hopefully where everyone has come, because there's a whole lot of goodies on here. There's a mid-course evaluation survey, which I will be explaining later in today's session. There's obviously the YouTube links to be watching today. We've then also got the resources, which Steph has already spoken to, but this one here, the text types and genres document, is what she showed in the PowerPoint earlier on. We've obviously got your links to the webinar 3 assignment that we'd love you guys to start submitting. But what we're really hoping you guys can start to do is connect with your virtual community of practice, because the stronger your engagement in each of these webinars, the more connections you're then likely to have built, and the more valuable you're not only going to find this course, but then also the virtual workshop, which is coming up in term 4. So you guys can access the virtual community of practice at the bottom of each of the webinar pages by quite simply clicking on this link. But I'm going to show you another way today as well. We've got the navigation bar that's down the left-hand side of your screen, and that's always going to be there in Basto 307. We know that the home page obviously takes you through to all of the different dots. So you can click on the About, you can directly view your virtual community of practice, or you can have a look at some of the webinar content that you may have missed from webinar 1, 2, and then webinar 3. You've also obviously got the announcements that have been posted, and a really important one was posted for everyone today, which I will be mentioning later in today's session. My apologies, my Basto 307 seems very slow to load at the moment. But I'm going to be taking you through to the discussion board, which is what we're really encouraging you all to utilise at the moment, especially seeing that there is a plethora of resources that you guys are using out there. Why not get onto Basto 307 and share those with your colleagues who are in your own virtual community of practice. It's been really great to see people posting on the Padlet wall as well. Someone was asking for a recommendation of a class novel to share with Year 6s. So this is the perfect spot for you guys to start to make those connections and those networks with your peers and your colleagues. So webinar 3, the discussion board is here. So I'm going to click on this and it's going to take me through to the prompts that we've got for you following today's webinar that you might like to consider. But my suggestion for everyone to make sure you're not missing any crucial information that comes out or some really great resources that your colleagues might be sharing is to actually subscribe to the discussion boards. So the way that you can do that through webinar 3 is down the bottom here, we've got this subscribe button. What you'll need to do is click on that. It's going to turn green once you have subscribed. So this is then obviously going to sync with your emails and you'll get an email notification when a new comment has been posted in here. I'm definitely encouraging all of you to be utilising this discussion board, not only to be posting some great resources or asking your colleagues for help, but having that opportunity to connect with each other, because odds are there's over 1,000 people in this course and most of you have probably got a really similar experience or a similar problem that you're trying to solve. So we'd really love to see you guys start to make some of those connections with your virtual community of practice, because it is absolutely going to help lift your conversations when you do get into that virtual workshop in term 4. So I've taken you through it and I've showed you how to do that. That is my biggest hint for you guys today, other than scrolling through the Padlet channel to have a look at some of the resources that have been there, is to actually potentially be posting some of those really great resources here. You might also like to actually be commenting about the things that you've started to try to implement or the things you're planning on implementing once you do get back to teaching face-to-face. Might even be the opportunity to actually share some ideas that you've maybe been discussing with your colleagues at a whole school level about some of your learnings and what you're hoping to do with the school. Odds are someone out there has been in a really similar circumstance and is going to be able to share some of their learnings with you as well. So back to you, Steph, to continue with the rest of the webinar content for today.
Thanks, Laura.
Okay. I have to admit I got a little bit distracted looking at all the books on the Padlet wall and compiling my next shopping list, so apologies. Welcome back to the second part of this afternoon's presentation. Deb and I are going to begin to unpack what student agency and student choice looks like in a literacy classroom. We're going to be talking about independent reading and the readers and writers notebooks, as I mentioned earlier. And while you're listening, we would really like you to think about how all these fit into and support authentic literacy in your classroom context. I'm going to begin with a definition of student agency so that as we move through the session, we all have a common understanding in mind. All right, so what is student agency? Most of you will be familiar with the department's document on student agency, Amplify. If you haven't read it, I do encourage you to take a look at it when you get a chance to, because it will help you to deepen your own understanding and how it applies in your school or classroom context. Amplify defines student agency as the level of autonomy and power that a student experiences within their learning environment. But why is that important? We know that when students have power to direct and take responsibility for their learning, they become independent and self-regulated learners. And isn't that what we would love for all of our students? Okay, so when students have choice, we know that they feel like they have a say in their education and that their voice is being heard. They take ownership of their learning, their stake is bigger and it's more meaningful to them. They're engaged in their own learning process and can reflect on the strategies that work and don't work for them in order to progress or succeed. They also have autonomy, and we're going to unpack this a little bit further as we talk about independent reading and the notebooks. Before we move on, take a moment to have a think about what student agency and choice looks like in your classroom. We know that it looks different from foundation all the way through to senior secondary, and that's perfectly fine. It should look different. In the Padlet, we'd love for you to share how you have incorporated student agency and choice into your classroom to give ideas to everyone else who is following along. We're going to begin to talk about independent reading, but before we do that, I wanted to share this quote from Jennifer Saravallo, who is kind of my current guru at the moment, and I pretty much hang off every word that this woman writes. She wrote this quote, and it encapsulates why independent reading time is so important for our students and how it supports and celebrates student agency and choice. The most meaningful and enjoyable thing students can be doing is engaging with texts of their own choosing. Many, hopefully all of you, do know firsthand the power of choosing what you want to read. And you'll have examples from your own classroom about the difference in student engagement when your students have the opportunity to select the text that they want to read. But what is independent reading and how does it support student agency? Independent reading looks different in every classroom that you visit, and over the years there have been lots of different ideas about what independent reading actually is and what is considered best practice. But independent reading is actually far more specific than you would think, and especially on what it's not, and that's what we're going to begin to unpack. So independent reading is not silent reading, drop everything and read, or uninterrupted sustained silent reading. It's not the time for teachers to be sitting in front of the class modelling reading while students are reading, nor should it be the time when teachers quickly mark the work that needs to be corrected or doing those last-minute photocopying jobs. Obviously, we want to give students lots of time to read, but independent reading has a very specific purpose. It's not the time for students to be left on their own to read or for them to be reading only teacher-selected texts. And it's definitely not something that only happens after lunch or on Fridays. So if it's not any of those things, then what is it? If you think back to webinar 2 when Jess and Emma discussed the Readers' Workshop and they shared some really fantastic quotes from Moss and Young, independent reading fits into this independent work portion time of the workshop model. And ideally, it should take place directly after the mini lesson so that students have the opportunity to put the new skills and strategies taught into practice. Independent reading is time that is set aside in an ideal world. That would be daily, but daily, what it looks like would actually depend on your particular context and how often you see your students, especially in a secondary setting. So for this, you really do need to consider your own context and adapt it to best suit your setting. The format or schedule is consistent for reading and students, and the expectations have been set as a class for how the time should be used, i.e. reading or responding to reading. And it is a genuine opportunity for them to read. And we know from the research that the greater the time set aside for reading, the more the student develops as a reader. Students are engaged in reading for the duration of the time, and during that, they are putting into practice the reading skills and strategies that they have been learning about in the mini lessons, as well as working towards mastering their own individual reading goals. It is time for students to be reading books of their choosing, demonstrating their ability to select good fit books. And if they are having difficulty selecting good fit books, it's really that opportunity for teachers to be supporting them and helping them towards making those good choices. It's also the time when students have the opportunity to be recording their thinking in their readers' notebooks, and we're going to talk about that very soon. While independent reading does sit at that independent stage of the gradual release of responsibility model, that doesn't mean that they're left to their own devices for the duration. They are learning to apply those new skills and strategies, but teachers have a really key role to play. During independent reading, teachers are active. They're conferring with students, engaging them in discussions about the text that they're reading, the goals that they're working on, or encouraging students to reflect on the work in their readers' notebooks. Through this monitoring, teachers have the opportunity to deliver on-the-spot instruction that meets the needs of the individual. It is an opportunity for teachers to identify the next steps or strategies need to be working on and developing these goals with students. Independent reading also gives students time to discuss what they're reading, both with their teacher and with their peers. So how does independent reading fit into student agency? Research tells us that independent reading is most effective when students have choice in the text that they want to read. That doesn't mean completely free range choice, but the more choice that we give them, the better readers that they will become. Our students need lots of opportunities to explore a variety of text types and genres and to identify the things they enjoy reading and the things that they don't. And a lot of that comes back and ties into what Steph was talking about earlier around really rich mentor texts. Having choice increases motivation, enjoyment, and allows for greater incentive for students to reflect on what they're reading because they have a reason for choosing those particular texts. But most importantly, independent reading gives our students choice and control over their reading, and that is key. We're now going to talk a little bit about the readers' notebooks. Given time constraints this afternoon, I'm not going to be able to go through the entire process of setting up a notebook or the nitty-gritty details of it, but hopefully we're going to be able to give you an overview so that you can start thinking about what this could look like for you, and also how you could set it up yourself and maybe what you might need to investigate before doing that. Basto has a really great range of professional learning opportunities if you do want to dig into this a little bit deeper, and there's plenty of opportunities to explore that. But hopefully tonight you'll walk away with a taster of what this could begin to look like for you. So what is a reader's notebook? Put simply, a reader's notebook is a tool to help students capture their thinking and understanding of the texts that they're reading while they're reading them. It can be any kind of notebook. There's no hard and fast rules. It could be a scrapbook for younger students, a lined notebook for older students, or even a digital notebook in our current circumstances. It's important that students have the opportunity to personalise their notebooks and that we as teachers value everything the students choose to put in them. They're a tool that your students can use to document their thoughts on what they're reading or what they have read. And they can do that in a variety of different ways. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. And they can be used all the way from foundation through to secondary school. They'll look different and the purpose behind them, they'll look different, but the purpose behind them will remain the same. In the junior years, you may begin with a class notebook that you jointly construct and then gradually release students to create their own, or you may keep your own personal reader's notebook and use that as a modelling tool, and that is highly effective for students to see. How you choose to set up your notebooks may vary, but the key is to spend time with your colleagues deciding how and why you want your students to be using them. Really, that's your purpose for them. You're going to think about how you're going to implement them and model them for your students, and you'll also be thinking about who is the audience for the notebooks going to be. If we put our student agency hats back on, we also want to make sure that we include students in the process of setting up and implementing our readers' notebooks because we want them to have some choice and control over them as well. Readers' notebooks are an authentic assessment tool for teachers as it gives us a chance to see how the students are processing the text that they're reading, to see what's going on in their heads when they are reading. And you'll be unpacking a little bit more about literacy assessment in webinar 4. Now, some of you may have been using readers' notebooks for years, and I encourage you to share your experiences in the Padlet. If you haven't used a reader's notebook before, a really key thing to keep in mind that it is just a tool, and like all classroom tools, students become more proficient as they use them. And it's perfectly fine to allow the notebook to evolve over time as you and your students become more confident in using them. There are a range of different things that you might include inside a reader's notebook. Typically speaking, some of the entries that you might find may include a reading log where students track the books they're reading, maybe when they start or finish. You might include page numbers, you might include genre if you want students to keep track of the genres that they're reading and encourage them to read across a variety of them. You could include reading surveys. These are really effective at the start of the year and can also be highly effective if you revisit them, where students actually get to think about themselves as a reader, and having that there to reflect on over time is really, really valuable. You might include thoughts and reflections on books before, during and after reading. You may have literature circle or book club responses included in there. If you have mini lesson anchor charts or notes, students may choose to include them in their notebook as well so they can reference them later on. You might have observations of characters. Growth and change over time throughout reading can be a really great way to track what's actually happening in the story. If your students use sticky notes to track things within their reading, the notebook is a great place to store them when the reading has been finished. Students may choose to look for and document new and interesting vocabulary that they find in a text. And ultimately, there are so many different types of entries that you can include on there, and I'm sure people are sharing so many wonderful examples in the Padlet. Depending on the age of your student and their writing capabilities, notebook entries could be written, or if you have much younger students, they could be drawings with labels or a combination of both. If you're someone who's already using those notebooks, again, I encourage you to keep sharing those examples in the Padlet. But before we move on, I really want to stress one thing about the Reader's Notebook. It's not a scrapbook for photocopied worksheets. And you might have some basic thinking tool templates, especially for younger students, but the authenticity of this tool comes from students being able to record their thinking rather than simply responding to teacher written questions. It does take time to develop this, but once students do develop the skills to do that, it becomes a really, really valuable way to see how students are actually accessing and processing what they're reading. As I mentioned earlier, this is something that will take time, but ultimately is so worth it. I'm now going to pass on to Deb, who's going to talk about the Writer's Notebook.
Wow, everyone, it's just hit 5 o'clock. I'm sure you're all going, wow, what an amazing, a lot of knowledge I'm gaining this afternoon by all these master trainers. You may actually have a few questions that have come across your mind throughout the constant listening and so many areas of literacy that you've been listening to. So please do put them into the Padlet so that we can follow them up a bit later. I really liked one of the suggestions that I saw on the Padlet that was by a fellow who said one of the things that he likes to use in the classroom around books was 2 stars and a wish book. So 2 stars for the books that are actually at level and that suit the kids, and then obviously one that's a topic of choice and enjoyment. But that's a good strategy I'm going to take away. So thank you for that one. I loved it. And again, thanks, Steph, for going around to the place with the readers' notebooks and explaining, the fact that we're not really going into all of it today, but we're going to give you a bit of a taste of what these notebooks are like and how you can use them in a classroom. I think the big thing with the writers' notebooks is that they really need to enable agency and have real authenticity about them when you use them with kids in an everyday situation. And they should be used every day in an authentic classroom, both primary and secondary schools. And I know that I have an absolute passion and love for all things writing, all things literacy. And I love last session with Tracy, where she talked about how will you dance with your students in a writing workshop. And I think that this is a fantastic tool to be able to do that with your kids at all ages and all levels. So saying it's a great tool is one thing, but how do you actually use that as a tool? How do you lead that dance? How do you get the kids involved in that dance? And how do you choreograph something that you want to play and extend and engage in constantly? So the fact that the Writer's Notebook is a lifelong tool is something we need to instill passion in our kids. And when we instill passion, the kids will follow with it and share their experiences and love of writing too. And it might even just bring along those kids that say, I don't write, or I can't write, or I hate writing. It's an avenue to get those kids in a way that you can. So there are many authors that have studied over the years and have developed their own writers' notebooks, and they use them. And all of those authors starting out with their own notebooks say that it's one of the most powerful tools for them as writers to find the ideas and then generate ideas from just everyday life, authentic experiences, places they've been, people they've spoken to, situations that they've had. And one of those people that Claire mentioned in webinar 2 around the writing workshop was Ralph Fletcher. And Ralph Fletcher you'll see him in so many places in a literacy sense, and he is an amazing person that advocates writers' notebooks and is exemplary really in all fields of writing. So any of his texts are texts that you will get something out of, I'm sure. And he has written here, one of his quotes from his book, A Writer's Notebook, Unlocking the Writer Within You, is when you come right down to it, a writer's notebook is nothing more than a blank book, but within those pages, you've got a powerful tool for writing and for living. And he's also somebody that totally backs up Amy Buckner, and a lot of you would know Amy Buckner from her work in readers and writers' notebooks. She's written the notebook know-how for writers' notebooks, but she also has the text notebook connections, which works around the readers' notebooks. So she's a real gun at knowing how to fit things in literacy-wise in readers and writers' notebooks. And she's certainly got a passion for it. And she writes, for a writer, the right combination of words, the perfect setting, or a solution to writer's block can come at any time in any place. It's important to have a place to record these bits of life that may serve to inspire further work. And the place for us is the writer's notebook. And another author that you probably know, or if you haven't, she knows a lot about literacy, is Lucy Calkins, and her along with Shelley Harwain have written this text, Living Between the Lines. And in that they suggest that nothing magical happens simply because youngsters bring notebooks to school. Notebooks can be just another place for writing, or they can represent a new way of thinking about the writing process. The most obvious way in which notebooks have altered my views of writing is that they have served as a concrete physical invitation to write. So the knowledge that these notebooks are a key tool in developing them as a purposeful and successful writers is the seed we need as teachers of writing to realise that we must provide our students with the same opportunity to develop and to learn as writers through having agency and authentic experiences in writing. We must also ensure we allow our students the time to write, because we give them the time to read. We know that how important that is, but we really need to make sure that that time to write is what kids do get, and that we give them just as much time to do it. And it's the old question is how do kids become better at writing? Well, by writing, as simple as that. And all research around student agency tells us that if you ask kids, if you survey kids, and I know that there's been a lot of surveys done, everything that comes out at the top of those surveys is kids want choice in what they write and they want more time to write. So again, I know there's been a couple of things in the Padlet about open cycle writing and the ability for some kids to be able to choose what they write and what they write about, I think is really important for us to understand that for us to have successful kids as writers that are lifelong writers that love to write, we need to enable those things that they keep telling us that they need. So just like Steph said, she went along with the what is a writer's notebook and what is it not. So a writer's notebook is definitely not a journal. It's not a new name for a journal or a reading log. It's not a diary. It's certainly not a response journal in which, you know, student and teacher conducted back and forth dialogue. Certainly isn't a booklet to collect teacher-generated worksheets or support materials for writing. It isn't a draft book either. However, you might, and I'll talk about it a bit later, but you might use pieces of writing from the writer's notebook in lifting them out and using them and taking them to a draft book at a later stage. And that'll be, again, a bit of agency in that, where kids can choose which pieces that they would like to take and to take through the writing process. And one of the biggest things about the work that's within the writer's notebook is that it is not corrected or written on by a teacher. Sometimes kids will want to share what they've got in their notebooks with you, and sometimes they won't. But when they do want to share it with you and you do feel like you want to give them feedback, or they're really looking for feedback, a good way of going about that is putting notes on post-it notes, putting them in, or giving them a little letter with ideas that they can take away with them. And sometimes it's just simply the oral feedback that you have as you support them through the writing conference, or through the discussions that might be had throughout the mini lesson or the strategy group that you're using your writer's notebooks with them in. So then that's what it's not. So what is it? Well, it is a tool used to record the things we notice and we observe and think about. Children always write best when they actually have something that they know about. And I know that Louise spoke a bit earlier about hands-on experiences. And it really is important that kids have the ability to write about things that they've experienced, things that they know, things that they've got a passion about and that are authentic and that they can have their own agency in. I think that's a massive, massive key to getting our kids that are reluctant writers to actually want to write. And again, the writer's notebook's a massive incentive for those kids. It is a blank tool where a writer can engage in the fun and often the messy job of being a writer. So it's the practicing, it's the listing, it's the playing with language, gathering images, having insights, finding quotes and ideas. The whole purpose of it is to nourish the individual as a writer. And most professionals, as I've already mentioned, have said that it is basically the most valuable tool of the trade. For people that are going to continue to write and want to write forever, that's what they'll keep and take with them. It also is a place that houses the writer's ideas that they can then go back to and develop their ideas later. So when they do go back to them, they can rethink them, reshape and restructure, revise, connect, and ultimately the ideas will give them places to go with for further writing. Some of the entries they might want to produce for a purpose and have a specific audience that they want to publish for, and some of the pieces of writing they'll just leave, and that's okay. And I know and I have been looking on discussion boards within my virtual community of practice, and some of the things that have been out there is about kids that just don't want to stick to one piece of writing. So, you know, that's always going to be a problem for us, but at the same time, we've got to balance the ability for kids to use this notebook to go back and forth between different pieces, but again, balance the fact that some pieces need to be taken through the writing process and be published, and that, of course, they'll have agency in that, and we will guide them through that, but at the same time, not every piece needs to go through that full process, and I think we need to enable kids to have those inputs into which ones they just don't want to take any further. It's also a place where you and your students get to know each other, and I think this is a real key to you understanding your students as a writer. If you understand that your kids have had different experiences, that they've been at different places, they've come from different backgrounds, you can see some of those things in what they put in their notebooks. It really, really does build and strengthen that relationship you have with them. And it also enables you to write with them and continue to dance with them in their writing and take them, lead them sometimes, and sometimes let them lead you. It's that place where you can do that together, and it's a real strength of teaching and learning when you can do that together, and kids love to be part of that. It's also a place where it provides low risk and high comfort zone. Students can begin to develop the habits of the mind. So students are able to develop their ability in seeing, thinking, expressing and reacting to the world, and then playing with parts of that. And they're essential for students to also then be successful in high stakes writing down the track. And as Ralph goes on to say there, what is the writer's notebook? Well, it is a place, and you can have a read of that if you haven't already when you have the slideshow later. So you see here, some of these are entries from a writer's notebook that is a class one. Some of them are ones that have been from mine, and others are from other kids' notebooks. But a notebook is something that's a place where you can model a love of writing and engage students authentically and with agency in the writer's workshop daily. And I think that real enthusiasm, that real joy in sharing that experience is what kids see as a guide to them being part of that too. You know, kids know when you like or don't like something, and we all know that as teachers. If you're a teacher that doesn't enjoy maths and you tend to put your maths back, some people do that, where other people will swap it with literacy. Kids know, they know what we are passionate about, and sometimes we just have to act that out that we do, but we do have to do that, because without the passion and without the real love of it, and the want and desire to have our notebooks there at all times, kids probably won't jump on board with you. You won't get that momentum. So please make sure you do have a notebook that is a class notebook, and it's one that you model in. It is one that you get kids to do at the same time as you. You show those kids the passion you have for it. You write with them, you write at the same time. You share things within strategy groups. So it is something that you take with you at all times, and encourage sharing of what's in it for those kids that want to share it. It's also somewhere where you show and discuss with students that, as I said before, not all, we just go back a slide, that's right, not all notebooks, discuss with students that all notebooks are not drafts. Many are purely just for the sake of writing and seeing what they come up with and playing with words and ideas. And then you can lift. So they might like to decide to lift something from their notebook and continue it as a draft, or possibly just leave it, like I said before. Again, part of your modelling would be showing how you lift something from that notebook and modelling how you take it through the writing process. So I think one of the biggest things for that is that kids can pull something that is authentic and something that they really are interested in out of the notebook and continue with it, rather than something that you might pull from somewhere else that everybody's doing that's a bit generic. I think if you can model doing those stages of the process with your text and then doing it with theirs at the same time, I think you get a lot more strength in writing and kids that want to take those pieces a bit further. Again, the kids do decide which pieces that they come out, not all the time, but there are certainly times where that's the way you would model it and use their text. Okay, and that's personal, and it's only shared when student really advocates for sharing. So you do not need to read everything that's in their notebook. They might put sticky notes on them and then show you the bits that they want to show you. I'll move along. I understand time's a bit quick. We need to get through it a bit quicker. Okay, what I will do is, it's decorated and individualised and cherished. Kids have to love it. It's, time that you put in with them. They need to be large enough to support plenty of writing on each page. The kids need to be able to put all their thinking and generate things down, and that's the beauty of using things that are something that's familiar to them, that they've decorated themselves. And as I said, it has to be part of the writer's workshop. It supports understanding of and engagement in the writing process. Just to finish off, I would like to really just hone in on something that I find really important, and I know that I'm passionate about, and I've seen in the past, is where people start with a passion in these writers' notebooks and then they tend to get dropped off as the terms go by. It is a part of everyday workshop. You should have your writers' notebooks with you. Kids should have them with them, and they should be using them every day. So yeah, passionate about writers' notebooks, love writing. Let's make sure our kids get passionate about them as well. Again, we want our students to develop as lifelong writers, to love and have a passion. And we want to see them share themselves, their thoughts, ideas and experience of the world in this amazing mode of expression. Again, we want to love them, have them love the dance of writing and dance with them. And it's, it's a bit of that gradual release of responsibility model within that as well. But it's something you will find that your kids will become much better as writers when they've got that writer's notebook that they cherish. Just pulling together the independent reading notebooks, student choice and agency. It's really important that students are in charge of choosing their own text and tracking their reading and applying their new knowledge from many lessons. And we'll go on a lot more into that, but we probably don't have the time for that today. Please make sure if you've got any questions, or if there's any insight that you have into how writers' notebooks have worked best in your classroom, that you place them into the Padlet or put them in your discussion boards in your community of practice, because it's certainly a place that I think we can have a lot more discussion and work in.
Thank you so much, Deb, for an excellent crash course in writers' notebooks and using them in the writing workshop, and really creating a community of writers with your students. We have had so many incredible contributions to the Padlet wall, including lots of really great questions. And whilst we do have a couple of things to finalise this afternoon before we head off at 5:30, we're going to open it up for a quick Q&A. We've collated some of your questions that you've been asking throughout the presentation tonight on the Padlet wall, and I've recently come across a new questioning technique called pose. So you pose a question, pause, you pause for a moment for people to consider the question, or students to consider the question. You pounce on somebody to answer the question, and then you bounce it to somebody else for them to build on, elaborate, or potentially contradict the answer that's been given in regards to the question. Now, we won't have time for all of these incredible questions tonight, but we do take time to read through the Padlet with a fine-tooth comb later in the week, and we'll be able to answer some of those later. We're also encouraging you to contribute to the webinar platform, so that if you've got anything that you urgently need answering, we've got such a great community out there ready to answer and contribute to your questions. So I guess the first question I'd like to pose and is about the concept of a book tasting, and how does a book tasting work? And I'm going to pause for a moment for our lovely facilitators to have a think about that. How does a book tasting work? I'm going to pounce on who I think might be able to answer this best, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Steph to talk about her book tastings in her classroom. Steph.
Okay, so this was a really great question in the Padlet wall, and if you haven't seen a book tasting, they're a really great way to expose students to a variety of text types in a really low stakes, non-threatening way. So last year when I was teaching my 3-4s, we set up our classroom and set up all the tables into little cafe style tables, and each table had a different genre or type of text that was allocated to it, and students got to spend a few minutes at each table throughout a session exploring those texts and actually having the chance to just get a real little taste for a different type of book that they might not normally pick up. So we had historical fiction, we had adventure stories, we had poetry, we had non-fiction, we had humorous stories, all those sorts of things. And we did a couple of times during the year. And at the end of every little tasting session, students would write down which book they'd tasted, and they'd do a little bit of a reflection on it, whether or not it was something that resonated with them, that they would like to continue reading. And it really got a few of them to step outside their comfort zone and try some new types of books where they previously might not have.
Thanks, Steph. I'm going to bounce over to Louise. Louise, any other ideas about book tastings or how you've done encourage students to use a whole heap of different texts in the junior years?
I think, Steph, what it's about is if you have a variety of texts set up for your students according to whatever it is that you're studying, and making sure that you have that variety of genre in your room for the students to select, and making sure that you've got at least 50% of non-fiction inside your classroom, but also allowing students to recommend books for others, so that they're doing book talks, they're writing their own book reviews, and in small literature circles sharing what they've learnt from books or sharing what they enjoy about them as well.
Thanks, Louise. Love to hear a junior school perspective, and I love that students are using each other as resources or as reviewers of texts that they're engaging in the classroom. I'm going to pose another question because I'm trying to answer as many of these incredible questions as possible. I'm actually going to pounce directly on Louise when I pose this, because it was connected to her section around authentic literacy experiences. And that was, although providing authentic experiences is always desirable and best for our students, it's not always possible 100% of the time. Do you have any advice on this, Louise?
This is a really, really great question, Steph, because I'd like everyone to think about authentic literacy experiences, not just about activities and excursions and so on, but that those experiences can relate to the rich, authentic literature that you're exposing children to. So what people need to do is once again, make sure that they're providing that rich, authentic literature that's connected to the learning that the students are doing. And by using that literature, they are making the experience authentic by using literature that is connected to what the students are learning. And I'd like to even, suggest that when I mention discordant events, that can be handled through the use of literature as well. Reading a book or a piece of literature, it doesn't have to be a book, to students that might make them, that might be thought-provoking or challenges their conceptions, that's just as much an authentic literacy experience as, say, for instance, doing an activity. So the remote learning experience has been quite a classic case of this, because we've had to ask students to actually look closely at their own backyards, if you like, backyards in inverted commas. So authenticity is often about ourselves, and that's really a key to understanding how to gain authentic literacy experiences as well. And during remote learning, we've also had some really fantastic virtual experiences that people have been able to join in with. But I guess the main thing is that all of the learning is linked. The books are linked, the experiences are linked to the area of study that you're undertaking in your classroom. And it's going to be authentic if you make sure that those pieces of literature are linked as well.
Thank you, Louise. Louise, sorry, what a comprehensive answer. I'm actually not going to bounce that to anybody else because I think you've nailed it. I will pose one final question and pounce on our lovely Deb. But Deb, do you have any answer to what the difference is between a reader's and a writer's notebook, and how to maybe provide just a scooch more clarity before we sign off for this afternoon's webinar?
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, both the readers and the writer's notebooks are amazing tools, but they are used for different purposes. The way you can set them up is similar, and you start with your own whole class writer's notebook or your whole class reader's notebook. But generally, the reader's notebook is responding to text. It's looking at the authentic text that they are reading. It's responding to the different types of comprehension. It's just responding to the different types of thinking. And kids will have that modelled through the mini lesson, but they'll also then do that during their independent reading time with the text that they have chosen themselves. So it is realistically a response to reading. The writer's notebooks start out as a bit of a generation of seeds for writing, getting topics and ideas for kids that can be taken and moved on with in a writing perspective. So they work both in literacy senses, but in sort of different directions. They are similar in lots of ways, but there are certainly differences in both.
Thank you so much, Deb. I really appreciate the clarification before we finish up for the night. I am going to pause our Q&A there. Whilst there is 100 more questions we could answer, we'd love to push through a little bit to finalise by 5:30. Just a reminder that there's lots of resources available. This PowerPoint will be uploaded to the BASTO 307 site. We strongly encourage you to read the Duke article and obviously all the other mentor texts and what's nuts up on the BASTO site. I'm just going to hand over to Louise to talk about our commitment to action very briefly before we finish up. Except lovely Louise is on mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Steph. As our slide says, to assist our community of teachers to support each other with further resources and ideas and real inspiration, what we'd love you to do is use our BASTO 307 discussion board to offer your colleagues a reflection on any of the following points before our next webinar. So we've got what you have decided to implement, something you might have trialled already. We've had some ideas already this afternoon. It's been fantastic. An idea that you've talked to your colleagues about, and we've had many of these today as well, a resource that you've used or read to inform your practice. So we'd love everybody to do that. So thank you for taking this action, which is going to really assist your colleagues to continue their learning. Thanks, Steph.
Thank you. Thanks, Louise. And just finally, if you could take a moment to have a reflection of our learning intention success criteria for this afternoon, maybe give us a virtual fist of 5 on the BASTO platform, and any key takeaways that you took away from tonight. Laura, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steph and team. Honestly, a really brilliant webinar tonight, and I guess what I loved is the fact that you guys are talking about student agency and authentic literacy experiences, and I felt like I actually was really kind of in it with you, and it was really authentic. I've added a whole bunch of books to my list to purchase as well. The Black Cockatoo, Across the Barricades, are right up there from things I read on the Padlet tonight. So thank you to those people who posted those. Obviously, I've already mentioned it and Louise has spruiked it as well. We would love you to start connecting with your virtual community of practice and actually posting on the discussion boards. As I said earlier, I think a really great way to start doing that is posting some of your literature resources to your colleagues to really share some ideas of what you've been using with what age levels and how you've been able to use that. So moving right along, some other ways that you can also delve into BASTO 307. The virtual workshops, which I mentioned earlier, are coming up in term 4, and everyone was sent a BASTO announcement yesterday, which you'll be able to access in the announcement section on BASTO 307 that I showed you earlier. So you can access this survey through the email in your inbox or through the announcements. Through this survey, you actually need to vote for the preferred virtual workshop date that is listed there for you. So each group of master trainers have pulled 3 potential workshop dates for you in term 4, following webinar 5 in the middle, end of October. So go in there, vote for the dates that are going to suit you based on your schedule. The most popular date once polling closes next Wednesday, so make sure you submit your quiz response, your survey response by Wednesday of next week. The most popular one of these is going to be selected and the date will then be confirmed with you. So please note that it's only one virtual workshop date that is actually going to be scheduled and run, but there are a couple of options for you guys to select from in there. We understand that you may not be able to attend that virtual workshop date once it's actually confirmed, so there will be a make-up task that is made available to you guys as well. Also, for any of those whole school groups that are participating, so school groups that have got 30 participants, we've got a separate activity for you guys as well. So if you don't have an announcement there in your inbox in BASTO 307, don't panic. If you're participating as a whole school group, we have a separate activity for you guys to be doing. The other ways you can delve deeper into BASTO 307 is obviously the usual crew of reviewing the webinar recording or the Padlet summary once the presenters tonight actually pull that together for you. Obviously, we'd love you to be submitting your webinar assignment, and my phone has been going off this afternoon with submissions, so it's really great to see. We'd also love you to complete the mid-course evaluation survey, which some of you have already done, and that was the link posted above the YouTube space in the webinar 3 page on BASTO 307. So there's a link to that to complete. I'll also pop that into the Padlet this afternoon for you to complete as well. But we'd really love that. Your feedback obviously informs our design of future courses. So we'd really value you taking 2 minutes to complete that. Otherwise, team, that is it for us for tonight and for term 3. The next webinar is scheduled in what was originally week 1 of term. So this is Wednesday, the 7th of October, with thank you to Daniel Andrews' announcements on Wednesday. I understand this is going to be a curriculum week for those working in Metro Melbourne, but we'd really love to see you all there. This one around balanced assessment is the perfect segue from some of the information you've heard from the Readers and Writers Notebook into how you can actually utilise that with your students to figure out the next point of their learning. So all the best. Take care and look after yourselves over the next month, and we will see you come term 4. So strap in, because who knows what will happen. But looking forward to seeing you all then. Thanks, guys. Have a lovely evening.